At the Tehran conference, Stalin first talked of dismembering Germany and then said to Churchill and Roosevelt that they should kill 50,000 German officers. Churchill, to pay him a compliment for once, found this abhorrent, so Stalin played it off as a joke. Roosevelt was all on board with Stalin. History has chosen to believe that Stalin was joking. They were wrong. Here's what really happened. This is part of the US plan to commit genocide against Germany after the war and end them as a country forever. This is the Morgenthau plan. The plan was written up by Henry Morgenthau, US Secretary of the Treasury, and Harry Dexter White, his assistant. These weren't just nobodies with some random plan they came up with. This was accepted. For a brief period, this was official US policy. The plan was leaked, and it played a huge part in why Germany wanted to fight to the end. It's important to mention that both Morgenthau and Harry Dexter White were Jewish, so you can imagine the field day Goebbels had with the information that two Jews, working at the highest possible level of American finance, wanted to genocide millions of Germans and crush the nation forever. To top it off, their plan was accepted as Allied policy. If the German people ever needed a morale booster or a reason to fight, this was it. To the German people, it was as if all the Nazi propaganda had come true to the word. It came out after the war that Harry White was a literal spy for the Soviet Union and that there was many questions about Morgenthau, but he was too big to touch. It came out, in fact, that Roosevelt during the entire course of the war was surrounded by Soviet spies. It is impossible to put into words in one video the extent that the United States was infiltrated by communist double agents. On September the 4th, 1944, in a planning session for the upcoming Allied conference in Quebec, the two of them specifically referenced Marshal Stalin's list of 50,000 Germans who ought to be shot. For some reason, the drafting of post-war plans for Germany was the Treasury's business. When the Allied victory was appearing on the horizon after the success of the Normandy landings, the Treasury Department planning for post-war Germany turned into a sick and twisted revenge fantasy. In the same meeting as the death quotas discussion, in reference to the Ruhr industrial area in Germany, Morgenthau said the following: "Just strip it. I don't care what happens to the population. I would take every mine, every mill and factory and wreck it. Steel, coal, everything. Just close it down. I am for destroying it first, and we will worry about the population second. Why should I worry about what happens to the German people?" This vile talk didn't come out of the blue. White warned Morgenthau that there was talk of the State Department drafting a much more lenient deal for post-war Germany, demanding the rapid reconstruction of their industrial base so that they could partake in the economy again and rejoin the European economy. In terms of reparations, it was suggested they last for no more than 10 years, so that Germany could become democratic without the various issues that they fell into after the First World War. Morgenthau got to work on convincing Roosevelt that this was the way to go, and putting him off the much more lenient plan from the State Department. Morgenthau said, quote, "We've got to be tough with Germany, and I mean the German people, not just the Nazis. We either have to castrate the German people, or you've got to treat them in such a manner that they can't go on creating people who want to continue the way they have in the past." Roosevelt was enthusiastically on board with the idea and promised to try and convince Churchill in Quebec. Stimson, the proponent of the State Department's plan, never stood a chance with Roosevelt. Morgenthau was deeply connected and was a huge donor to the Democratic Party. The plan pitched to Roosevelt went roughly as follows. Firstly, the mass murder of at least 50,000 German officers without a trial. The Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Germany, was to be totally stripped of all its industry. All metallurgical, chemical, and electrical industries in Germany as a whole were to be removed. Germany would be split up into several smaller states, as well as a huge international zone, which was effectively so the land could be milked for reparations for the various powers. This looted industry from Germany would go to the powers who had been invaded by the Nazis, presumably, since at least 7 different known Soviet agents had a hand in drafting this plan. This meant presumably the Soviet Union. And to top it all off, Stalin was to be allowed to use the German people as slave labor. As he marched into Germany, he would be allowed to take as many German people as he wanted and simply employ them as slaves. When asked what would happen with the surplus population after the industry was taken away, Morgenthau said that they would simply be dumped in the barren wasteland of North Africa. Stimson invited Morgenthau and White for dinner after this, Stimson being furious that his deal had been torpedoed. At dinner, he confronted Morgenthau with the fact that at least 30 million Germans would die if the plan was carried out, mostly from starvation. They simply would not be able to survive if their land was raped the way the plan was suggesting. Neither Morgenthau or White objected. They simply did not care. It seemed as if this was part of the plan, not a sad byproduct of it. Stimson claimed that this plan was totally against Christian values and would bring chaos to post-war Europe rather than helping it to recover. He felt that German people were a hard-working people, and it was better to have them on side to help Europe rebuild after the war. Morgenthau complained that Stimson was misguided by his silly Christianity, and that it didn't matter if Germans died. In his eyes, they were all guilty. He was hell-bent on a sick sort of revenge. Next, Morgenthau was invited along to the Allied conference in Quebec to put his case before Churchill. He brought his sidekick, the spy, White, with him. When Churchill heard the plan, he exploded at Morgenthau, berating him endlessly about how sick and twisted the plan was. He also made the case for being totally against Christian values, the same way Stimson did. He claimed the English people would never stand for such a thing. According to Morgenthau, Churchill was even crying. Churchill, who for whatever reason couldn't bring himself to sign for humanitarian reasons, yet was happy to firebomb German cities, hit a brick wall. Morgenthau simply said that unless Churchill signed, all of the Lend-Lease aid that was meant for the post-war recovery of Britain would be withdrawn, every single penny. Unless, of course, he signed. This was no small amount. In modern day money, it's 2/3 of $1 trillion. Churchill had no choice. He signed. Eden, Churchill's closest confidant, screamed at him, telling him he can't do this, and it's against all the values that the two of them had spoken of so far. When I have to choose between my people and the German people, I'm going to choose my people, Churchill said. Thankfully, however, this story has a hero. Stimson leaked the plan to the press, and dozens of others, upon hearing about this sick plan, went berserk at Roosevelt. They couldn't believe what their country had become. This would be akin to the greatest genocide in human history. A similar thread rung through all of these objections. Like Churchill and Stimson, anyone with an ounce of morality felt this was utterly unchristian. In a way, it appeared that Christ was intervening to save the German people. Faced with this onslaught and the prospect of this blowing up in his face just before an election, he played dumb. He said to Stimson, insanely, that he had no idea how his signature had gotten on such a document, and that he must have been misled when Stimson showed him his own signature on the document. One of the main objectors of this plan was the army at all levels. Due to the news reaching Germany about the plan, resistance had noticeably stiffened. The German people were not just going to be pushed around into slavery and starvation, they would fight to the last now. Key members of the army went crazy at Morgenthau, slamming him for convincing the enemy to fight on, while the army was trying to convince Germany that the war was over and that they should lay down their arms. The American government had quite literally created what Nazi propaganda was warning of. The faith in the Führer became stronger than ever. The plan was pulled by Roosevelt, however, it was a base for future plans. After peace was signed in 1945, millions of Germans would still go on to die after the war in ways not too dissimilar from some of the points in the Morgenthau plan. Eisenhower was even one of the biggest fans of the plan. But thanks to the intervention of these great Christians, millions of innocent German lives were spared, although Stimson wasn't going to act quite so Christian when it came to the Japanese a year later.